joining us on the line is Fremantle's Head of Player Personnel, David Walls. David, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
How have you seen the whole trade period shake out for you? Of course, you've lost Lachie Schultz, Liam Henry and Joel Hamling. Are you okay with how everything sits at the moment?
We're okay. Look, it's never ideal to lose players, like particularly good players. It's definitely something that we didn't want, particularly Lachie and Liam to go. It's really once they made their decision, it was us to really swing into action and just try to get the best result possible for the club and make the most of it. And I feel that with the hand we've got in, really well set up for the 2024 draft, but also gives us options to get back in to the draft on draft night this year and also trade situations.
Well, we'll unpack your 2024 draft hand later, but I want to start with Lachie Schultz because since we last had you on the show about a fortnight ago, that situation has evolved to a point where he's now a Collingwood footballer. How did this emerge on your desk that he wanted to return home and he wanted to play for Collingwood?
Yeah, it all came very late. So that was probably the disappointing part of it, just how late it did come. So we'd actually done the trade on day one with Port Adelaide and been through the process with the AFL on Monday when Lachie started calling around midday. So we'd had previous conversations with him and knew that he was going to be a free agent next year. And we'd had long discussions about extending his contract and some quite good discussions and positive ones in terms of where Lachie sat, how he was feeling at the club and wanting to be involved. But his situation did change and obviously mindful of some personal circumstances as well, so that changed with Lachie as well, which he made us aware of. So it did come late and not ideal. But like I said, it was just something that we had to then work. He was contracted, so it was just making sure that the club got the best deal possible.
Felt like he did get a really good deal yesterday. Talk us through the transaction. You ended up with a future first-round pick plus pick 34 in this year's draft. Was your preference to get a pick for next year rather than Collingwood's pick this year at pick 19?
We just felt like the 19 will slide back a fair way. Basically, when we put all the academy players in and some father-sons, that pick could end up in the mid-20s. Also feel that next year's draft's stronger than this year's draft. And by having, the pick 34, with Gold Coast holding so many picks in the 20s, there'll be opportunities to get up either into the 20s or a lot of those picks will be, taken out of the system when the bids come for the Gold Coast Academy players. So we feel like the 34 won't move too far, whereas the 19 would slide back. And then we've got to look at Collingwood's future and obviously based with how they perform next year, but they'd obviously have to win the grand final and then a couple of compensation picks have jumped in as well. So hoping that it'll be a much better pick next year from a Freo perspective.
We're speaking to Fremantle's Head of Player Personnel, David Walls. David, just before we move on to Liam Henry, I'm just wondering what you think around the broader dialogue when it comes to a player requesting a trade home, whether it be for family reasons or not, but then specifically requesting a club. Do you find that problematic?
I do. I feel like, and we see it a lot, but when a player requests to go back to a home state, I feel, particularly when the relationship's been strong with the club and a player's been looked after and developed and the club's looked after that player, I feel like there should be more of an openness to look for any club within that state so that the club that's losing the player is positioned to get the best deal possible. So, I feel like there needs to be a strong relationship between the player, the manager and the club to ensure that happens.
And I guess that's why the Liam Henry trade to St Kilda is a little bit strange because he is a WA boy. You essentially get a future second back. Is that a little bit unders in your eyes?
It's not ideal. I think, on an open pool, and if you were to put Liam in this year's draft, he'd be a little bit higher than that. But in saying that, I think it just highlights the value of a player being in contract as opposed to being out of contract. And we were into Tyler Brockman and would have loved to have entertained a trade there, but when a player's out of contract and then there is the threat of the pre-season draft and I guess ending up with nothing in return, that's something that you've got to really weigh up when making your decision. So, looking at players in contract versus out of contract makes such a difference when you're negotiating and the leverage that you have.
Now, David, Josh and I, we like the finer things in life. When we heard that Sauce was wining and dining you last week, can you reveal where it was that you went out for a nice meal?
He took us through a great pass for lunch at Dunedin's on Friday, and then he loves meeting at Brunetti's as well. So spent a bit of time down Lygon Street the last week, and I did hear that he was quite upset that he thought I blew his soft cap up with the bill for lunch.
Danini's, I quite like that. Wolsey, you mentioned Tyler Brockman then. He ended up getting that move to West Coast on Saturday for picks 44 and 63. Freo monitored that situation pretty closely. You did offer him that 4-year deal in the end. Did you think you were close to turning his head?
I think it got closer as it went on. We had always had conversations with Hawthorn, with Tyler and his manager as well, that we were really keen to bring him in. So I think it got a little bit closer, but in the end, I think he's got a really strong relationship and a family connection with Liam Ryan, and I think just that link and relationship was probably too strong, and why he wanted to get to West Coast.
Can we talk about retention, Wolsey? Because if you look back to 2018, you've now had 13 players depart dating back to Lachie Neale. Now, a lot of them for different reasons, but the number's quite big. Is retention an issue? Is it something that your club's going to need to focus on over the off-season to address going forward?
Yeah, it's something that we constantly review. And we'll continue to look at. Every situation is different. Even when you look at Liam and you look at Lachie this year, different reasons. And Lachie loved his time at the club and was heavily invested. But I think when you look at the numbers as well, we've got 14 players, which are our core players that we see taking us on and taking us to a premiership, that are contracted to 2026 and beyond. So that's the largest number of any club in the competition. So I feel like we've got a lot of players committed for a long term, and that's really positive, and are invested and 100% in. But also when you look at the numbers too, and you go back to 2017 or 2018, GWS have lost more players than anyone, and they're a point off a grand final. And Collingwood as well was another club that we looked at, and our numbers have been quite similar to them in terms of players that have come and gone in that period. So I think retention is important and something that we will look at and need to make sure it's a real focus, but also had a lot of players come into the club in that period as well. And retaining your core group and the ones that are really going to carry you to a flag is what's crucial, and where we put all our energy.
Now, one of those players that's not locked in from up until 2026 is Sean Darcy. We asked you about him a fortnight ago. A lot of Fremantle supporters are just sitting here nervously waiting for that deadline to strike tomorrow night to ensure that he's going to be in purple next year. How are discussions going with yourself, his manager Scott Lucas, and Sean Darcy?
Yep. Again, look, everything's really positive. We've got an offer to him, which he's now sitting down and looking at and talking about with his family and his manager. And he's actually heading off overseas to America on a training and high performance trip with some of our coaches and a lot of our players. So he'll spend time over there and think about it. When he gets back, we'll really sit down and get into the nuts and bolts of it, probably in December. But at this stage, conversations have been super positive, and I'm expecting Sean to be at Fremantle for life.
He's clearly one of the big free agents in the pool heading into next year. Again, he proved he was one of the premier ruckmen in the comp this year before he had that ankle injury late in the year. Do you feel like you can get this done over the pre-season and remove the distraction heading into round one?
That'd be ideal. That'd be, if you could put a timeline on it, you'd say that'd be the preference. But just sometimes these things can take a little bit longer with the back and forth. But that would be the goal, and ideally we have Sean locked up before Christmas. But it's sort of hard to put an exact timeline on it.
Last one for you, Wolsey, before we let you go. As we sit here right now, you've currently got 3 first-round picks for next year. You're in a really good spot when you consider you've got your own, you've got one from Port Adelaide, and you've now got one from Collingwood. So much interest in Logan McDonald, given where he currently plays his footy. Are you well placed to make a play and prize him out of the Swans?
But Lord, yeah, that's part of our list management strategy is tracking all West Australians, and particularly the quality ones and ones that are starting to come out of contract. So yeah, Logan clearly fits that criteria. But there's also many other West Australians in the comp as well that we're tracking really closely and would love to bring back. And yeah, we'll really be targeting specific needs from this point on. Like I said, I feel like we've got a really strong core group that are locked away and committed long term, and we will be targeting specific needs to really round out the list in the next 12 months.
David, really appreciate you coming on the Trade Exchange. Thank you for being so generous with your time.
No worries. Thanks for having me.